Hey, world history students. Today we're going to start our first unit, which is Unit 1, the Byzantine Empire. So I'm going to go over this PowerPoint with you. Be sure and take a look at the mastery standards. You can see that for Standard 1, we have to understand how the Eastern and Western Empire were similar. And we also have to understand the influence of Constantine, which we'll do tomorrow. So today, just as kind of a review, it's probably been sixth grade since you saw this, if you ever saw it. We're going to talk a little bit about the Roman Empire as a whole, and then tomorrow we'll talk about Constantine. So let's take a look. We're going to talk about the fall of the Western Roman Empire. To understand the Byzantine Empire, which is really the Eastern Roman Empire, you have to understand what happened in the West as well. So the Romans had one huge empire. They split it into East and West. The Western half falls. The Eastern half goes on, and the Eastern half becomes known as the Byzantine Empire. So that's what our first unit of study is we're going to study that Eastern Empire. All right, so this was the Roman Empire at its height. It completely surrounded the Mediterranean. It stretched into what Britannia, which is today Great Britain and London. It went through Paris and Spain and all the northern coast of Africa, Egypt, stretched into Mesopotamia, what today would still be Armenia. So you can see it goes from essentially, Europe through Africa into Asia practically. So it was the greatest empire ever known at that point, and completely surrounded that Mediterranean Sea. So you can see Italy. Remember, hopefully you've been taught this. Italy looks like a boot. I always think it looks like a boot kicking a ball or something, and so that's Italy. And so it extends into the Mediterranean. Over here is Greece. So that's where the Roman Empire was. Okay, today we still feel the influence of the Roman Empire. Latin is the basis of all the Romance languages. So the Romance languages are English, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. So if you speak any of those languages, they're based on Latin, which was the language of the Romans, all right? And so in English, you're going to study prefixes and suffixes that are Latin based to help you figure out words. Latin, we study the Latin and the Greek. And frankly, the Romans preserved the Greek as well. Roman gods, the Romans took the gods of the Greeks and renamed them. And so Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, and Mars are the names of the Roman gods. I think the names of the Greek gods are a little more famous, but Neptune certainly we know. And it also became the names of our planets. Our calendar, the names of our months. August is named after Augustus. So the names of our month are January, Janus. So very much influenced our calendaring system and the idea of having a calendar. Their architecture and art styles, they completely had road systems that connected every part of the empire and brought all the roads came back to Rome, so that all roads lead to Rome. Their column structures, you probably studied Corinthian and all the different column structures. And the they built arches, they built aqueducts, they gridded their cities, and we live in gridded cities today. That means it's all laid out into squares. So a lot of that is influencing our cities today. Our government is heavily influenced by the Roman Republic, at least. And that was the idea of having a representative government. And they had a republic, they had senators who represented the people. So that kind of influence is felt. Okay. Today they talk about the United States as and compare it to Rome. Are we going to fall? Like all empires have fallen. Will the United States fall? Another big thing, and we're going to study some religions. We'll study Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So that is Christianity really thrived and would eventually, after they persecuted the Christians, would actually thrive in the Roman Empire, and they would be able to spread across those Roman roads, through the length of the empire. So Christianity really comes from the Roman Empire, essentially, because everywhere that Jesus was, especially the New Testament stuff, was part of the Roman Empire at that time. Okay, so in your notebook, as you listen to these notes, I'd like you to draw a chart because we really have to understand why the western part of the empire fell. So you want to just draw a little chart: political, social, economic, and military. What were the reasons that the West falls? So let's take a look at that. So you're going to draw this in a chart. You can pause this video. In class, I'd be waiting a few minutes while everybody drew it, but I'm not going to pause. You can pause the video once you've drawn the chart and then fill it out. Okay, so why did it fall? Why did the western half fall? At one point, the empire is divided into western and eastern. A guy named Diocletian decided the empire had just gotten too big, and so he divided it and he ruled the eastern half, and then he had someone else. So Diocletian ruled the eastern half, and Maximian ruled the western half. So they thought that would be more conducive to running the empire. In the western half, Rome is always the capital of the empire. For the longest time, Rome was the capital of the entire empire, that idea that all roads lead to Rome. So the military would travel the roads, the tax money would come along those roads back to Rome. And so Rome was the capital. And so when they split, they then create a new capital, but we don't have to worry about that one. We'll worry about the one Constantine creates. Okay, so Diocletian splits it in half. On the western half, that is Gaul. Gaul is France. So if you see that, that's what was France before it was France. Britain, Spain, and Egypt. Is Egypt in there? No, not Egypt. So you're going to see the western half of Africa. It would include, I can't think of the name of it. Okay, it's all right. On the eastern half, they actually spoke Greek. They would be able, the educated people would also be able to read Latin, but on the eastern part, they spoke Greek. And so this is the Anatolia, which today is Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Greece. They spoke Greek in that region. So by language, it was a natural split. It also allowed easier control and having a center. Now, the best thing about having this huge empire is there was huge amounts of trade. They could trade with Asia over here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. They could trade with Asia over here, and then, all the trade that went on in the Western Empire. So they're very well connected. Constantine, who we'll talk about tomorrow, ultimately will move the capital of the Roman Empire to a place called Byzantium. It'll become known as Constantinople. It'll be named for Constantine. But at the time it was Byzantium. So Constantine moves the capital of the eastern, of all the empire. He reconquers the whole empire, decides, nope, one person's going to rule this. But he moves the capital from where it's always been in Rome to this little kind of backwater trading town called Byzantium, which he recreates as a city, and the city will be named for him, Constantinople. This connects the east to the west. There's great trade here. It's easily defended. It sits out into the sea on this little peninsula, and he's going to build walls around it, and he literally transports big things from Rome. He has it transported over to Byzantium. So he relocates the capital. That is going to be really part of the downfall of the western half of the empire, because now they have no real center. It's a long way away. And so that is going to contribute to it. So why did the western half? Politically, the military gets involved. Diocletian, Maximian, Constantine, they're military leaders, and so they become the political leaders. Then the empire split into two. That was not good for the empire. And then Constantine moving the capital from Rome to Byzantium, which becomes Constantinople, is kind of the last blow for them. All right, social reasons. All right, they had a lot of disparity. We can kind of relate to this in our society. There were very few wealthy, super wealthy, and everybody else was poor. And as the empire went on, the rich got richer, the poor got poorer. Okay, they also suffered from a plague. Okay, so disease was problematic. So the plague struck, that killed a lot of the farm workers. So then there were food shortages, and Romans quit having as many kids. And you studied that if you took AP Human, how when you get more advanced, you have less children. Also, this was a military society. But as Christianity spreads through the empire, more people became Christian. And, one of the founding principles of Christianity is thou shalt not kill. So they became less interested in serving in the military. And that's going to lead to a military reason we'll talk about. And people just became uninterested in government affairs. They didn't want to run for office. They saw it as only a place for rich people, and that they really didn't have a place there. So socially, it became, people became disinterested in the government. They didn't want to serve in the military. They got hit with diseases like plague, and food shortages, less children, so less population. All of those kind of reasons contribute to the downfall of the Western Empire. All right, economic. They get invaded. So once, the empire splits, and especially when Constantine moves the capital, there's just all kinds of invasions. Invaders are coming to the city. They're looking for riches. And by invaders, we're talking about these tribes. They call them the barbarians. They're Germanic tribes known as the Goths, the Visigoths, as the Goths, the Huns. A whole bunch of different invaders come from the north, looking for wealth, and they hit the cities, which will cause people to move out of the cities because they don't want to get invaded anymore. Economically, they charge everybody lots of taxes to fund that big empire, to pay for the roads, to pay for the military. Costs a lot of money, so taxes are really high. People are really poor. Most of the people in the empire were living in poverty. And then when they had poor harvest, because there's constant wars and battles, the plague hits, then they don't have the food, and so it leads to food shortages, and so then food becomes more costly. So those are all economic causes for the West to fall. Military reasons, again, I told you Christianity makes them less willing to serve in the military. I got a typo there. The military had to hire mercenary soldiers. So mercenaries are soldiers for hire. They're expensive and they're not loyal. So often it would be the mercenary soldiers from barbarian tribes that would sack the cities and Rome and the other cities. So unreliable, not loyal, and that cost them a lot of money. They were constantly under threat from those invaders from the north. Like I said, the Huns, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths are the ones who finally sacked the city, and the Vandals. And then there's constant civil war. So there's battles within. A civil war is a battle where you fight yourselves. And so all of these things had the military overextended. They didn't have enough soldiers. And so those are all problems that caused, what had been this great and mighty military, it definitely weakened them, and they weren't able to protect the empire. All right. The main reason is just constant invasions. And so you can see this list, all these colors are different barbarian tribes, excuse me, that keep invading the western side. You don't see them in the eastern side. The Ostrogoths try and make a run for it, but they keep coming and attacking Rome. And so those invaders, we always say the invaders from the north. That was the main reason. So and guess what? They don't have a strong military. They can't fend them off. They can't fund their military. That's an economic cause. People don't want to fight in the military. That's a social cause. So that all weakens them for these barbarian invasions. And ultimately, in 476, the Roman Empire on the western side will fall. Everybody moves out of the cities. They start mixing with these tribes. And so they start living a rural lifestyle. More tribal, so they get away from, after a few hundred years, they don't even remember the learnings of they don't speak Latin anymore. They don't remember what how they built the aqueducts. Can you imagine living in ruins of aqueducts, but you don't know how they were built because they lost that learning? And so the West falls into the Dark Ages, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the Middle Ages, how it begins with the Dark Ages, and that's after the fall of Rome, but that's on the western side. On the eastern side, where Constantinople is, the Byzantine Empire, it's going to last for another 1,000 years. and it's going to be very successful. And that's why we're going to talk about them. So they considered themselves Romans, okay, but they will thrive while the other side falls.